9. Haley Nichelle Clifton Karmac. 26-year-old Haley Nichelle Clifton Karmac could have probably had any guy she wanted. It's one of the many reasons why people were confused when she decided to hook up with one of her students. The glamorous high school math teacher from Waynesville, Missouri, was arrested in Texas in early 2024 after a classmate of the victim showed incriminating photos to a school resource officer who called the police. During the investigation, detectives visited the school and spoke with Clifton Karmac. They took her phone, but were unable to unlock it and examine its contents until they obtained a search warrant for the device. According to court documents, text messages confirm the relationship. The material found inside the phone also revealed that other students acted as lookouts during Clifton Karmac's encounters with the victim, which reportedly took place on school property and in the victim's driveway. At some point in the past, Clifton Karmac had been warned by her superiors about their concerns she was getting too close with students. Court documents state that the disgraced former teacher had habits of dressing inappropriately and being overly friendly. In another surprising twist, the victim's father, Mark Crichton, is facing an endangerment charge for allegedly knowing about the illicit relationship and failing to report it to authorities. The cases against Clifton Karmac and Crichton appear to be ongoing. 8. Gary and Diane Mansel. Father of 3, Gary Mansel married his second wife Diane in Las Vegas in 2005 after divorcing his first wife. The couple lived a comfortable middle-class lifestyle in Liverpool, England, but they allegedly got greedy enough to swindle Gary's elderly parents out of a 6-figure sum, leaving the senior citizens almost penniless. According to the authorities, the theft began after Gary and Diane were granted power of attorney over Fred and Enid Mansel's finances and assets in 2017. The decision came shortly after Fred suffered a fall at age 77 and Enid began showing signs of dementia. Gary and Diane sold the elder couple's home but didn't give them any of the proceeds and allegedly drained the victim's savings, spending the ill-gotten funds on vacations, designer handbags, jewelry, home renovations, cars, plastic surgery, and other luxury indulgences. Social workers eventually caught on to the couple's crimes and complained to the authorities, resulting in Gary and Diane's arrests on suspicion of fraud and money laundering. During the trial, the court heard about how Fred and Enid lived a depressing, isolated lifestyle inside Gary and Diane's home, while the thieving couple spent nearly all their money. By the time the trial rolled around, Enid had passed away. Fred took the stand and described his wife's last months as horrible and traumatic. Gary and Diane were convicted as charged in November 2023 and were each sentenced to 6 years in prison. 7. Dustin Duy. While growing up in Calgary, Alberta, Dustin Duy showed undeniable signs of anger problems. But his family always hoped he would outgrow his short-tempered nature and learn how to handle his problems in a more composed fashion. And even when that failed to happen, they never imagined that Duy's behavior would escalate into horrific violence, despite all the potential warning signs being present, including the fact that the entire family had grown to walk on eggshells in order to avoid triggering his explosive rage. Instead of seeking help for his obvious mental issues, Duy chose to live a criminal lifestyle. He also abused steroids, which, as you can imagine, did nothing helpful for his violent streak. And instead of pursuing a meaningful career and lifestyle, he still lived in his parents' basement at the age of 27. Duy stole, vandalized, and even inflicted physical harm on his loved ones, yet he managed to escape any serious charges because, in most cases, victims chose not to press charges against him. All things considered, it was only a matter of time before the young man's unchecked rage reached a boiling point. This happened in July of 2018 when Duy cut his 24-year-old girlfriend's throat. By the time Taylor Toller was found dead in her apartment a week later, it was too late to stop Duy from fatally stabbing his mother, Sean Boschuk, and his stepfather, Alan Penny Legion. Shortly after the double murder, he called the police and confessed to killing Boschuk, Penny Legion, and Toller. Just days before Duy was scheduled to go to trial in 2021, he pleaded guilty to all 3 murders. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 35 years, which means he'll be in his mid-80s before he has a chance of seeing freedom again. 6. Richard Orne. In March 2015, a 45-year-old financial advisor named Richard Orne disappeared in Boca Raton, Florida. A boat he'd rented was found covered in blood and adrift in the Atlantic Ocean more than 2 miles from shore, sparking a 3-day air and water search. This, along with over a dozen more search efforts that were launched over a 4-day period, failed to turn up any sign of the missing man. Roughly 2 weeks after he vanished, Orne turned back up in Boca Raton. Further investigation revealed that he'd faked his own death by abandoning his boat, rowing an inflatable raft back to shore, and driving off in a recently purchased pickup truck. During his time away, he hid out at his second home in Albany, Georgia. At the time of his disappearance, Orne was facing a mounting pile of personal and legal issues. In 2014, the state revoked his broker's license due to allegations that he stole more than $12,250 from 2 elderly clients while working for Chase Bank. A few years before that, Orne had been fired from Wells Fargo due to other shady behavior. With his career in finance practically in ruins, prosecutors theorized that Orne faked his death to avoid facing accountability for his actions. In reality, he'd created a whole new world of problems for himself, which included criminal charges relating to his phony disappearance. In 2016, Orne pleaded guilty to 1 count of communicating false distress to the Coast Guard. The charge carries a maximum prison sentence of 6 years, but he managed to avoid any time behind bars. Orne was sentenced to a year of probation in exchange for agreeing to pay the Coast Guard $1 million for the wasted resources that were used searching for him, which totaled an estimated $400,000. As they say, money talks, and in this case, it appears as though it was used to mitigate the consequences that Orne faced. He was also banned from working as a financial broker in Florida ever again. 5. Serial dine and dasher fakes heart attacks to avoid restaurant bills. Some people will go to more extreme lengths than others to avoid paying a dinner tab, but few, if any, would go as far as a 50-year-old Lithuanian man known only as Aidas J, who allegedly faked heart attacks in at least 20 restaurants in order to get a free meal. It's hard to say what was going through the serial dine and dasher's mind whenever he executed what likely seemed like a foolproof plan to get out of paying the bill at various establishments in Alicante, Spain. But his habit of clutching his chest and falling to the floor got old as the unpaid checks tallied up, amounting to at least $800 in fine food and drinks at the victim's expense. According to reports, Aidas posed as a Russian tourist, spoke a mix of languages, and wore designer clothing, giving off the impression that he would have no problem affording his meal. He was allegedly a character of habit, starting each meal with a Russian salad washed down by several glasses of whiskey. The indulgent diner then selected his main course, which was accompanied by several more glasses of whiskey. Aidas was finally arrested in October 2023 after restaurant manager Moises Domenech noticed the particularly theatrical nature of his fake heart attack. He was taken to the hospital for his fake ailments, but by then the authorities had caught on to his act. Since then, Aidas has been arrested multiple times for his dine and dash act and for ignoring his court dates and failing to pay fines. Needless to say, he's no longer getting freebies the way he used to, and he's had the additional embarrassment of his case making international news headlines. 4. John Drake Jr. In October 2023, 38-year-old John Drake Jr. shot 2 police officers in a Dollar General parking lot in Laverne, Tennessee. The small city is located roughly 20 miles outside much larger Nashville, where the suspect's father, John Drake Sr., works as the Music City's police chief. Laverne police officers Ashley Bowleyjack and Gregory Kern were responding to a report about a stolen vehicle outside the store when they got into a struggle with Drake. Luckily, both officers survived their injuries, but by the time backup arrived, Drake had fled the scene in the stolen car, and it soon became clear that he had no plans to surrender willingly. Nearby residents spent the next 11 hours in lockdown as law enforcement searched for the suspect with no luck finding them. Amid the manhunt, Nashville Police Chief John Drake Sr. released a statement calling for his son's arrest. He said that he'd had very minimal contact with the younger Drake in recent years. Drake Sr. made it clear that he had done his best as a parent, stating, "Despite my efforts and guidance in the early and teenage years, my son resorted to years of criminal activity and is a convicted felon." Records show that Drake Jr. had 59 prior arrests, not including the incident in Laverne. Police finally began to close in on the repeat offender 3 days later, after he crashed yet another stolen car and fled on foot. He took shelter in a shed, where he was found dead from a gunshot wound by pursuing officers. As it turned out, the repercussions of Drake Jr.'s poor life decisions were apparently too much for him to bear, so he chose to escape the consequences on his own terms rather than own up to his actions in a court of law. 3. Herbert Miller. In early 2024, law enforcement received a tip claiming that a pastor was selling drugs out of the rectory at the Woodbury United Methodist Church in Connecticut. A cooperating witness arranged a drug deal, also known as a controlled buy, resulting in the arrest of 63-year-old Reverend Herbert Miller. According to police, Miller arrived at the prearranged meeting spot and was met by arresting officers. At the time, he was allegedly in possession of crystal methamphetamine in both rock form and liquefied into a hypodermic needle prepared for injection. Investigators found additional drugs and paraphernalia during a subsequent search of the preacher's home. Miller was booked on multiple charges, including possession of narcotics with intent to sell, possession of a controlled substance, use of drug paraphernalia, driving an unregistered vehicle, and driving without insurance. He was released on a $10,000 bond and skipped his next scheduled court appearance, prompting the judge to issue a warrant for his arrest. Several days later, police spotted Miller in the passenger seat of a U-Haul near his residence and took him into custody. The truck was reportedly filled with his belongings, indicating that he was in the process of moving out of the rectory. During Miller's next court hearing, prosecutors claimed that he'd shown up to his previous scheduled hearing, but that he left before his case was called. No explanation was offered for why he left the hearing, but the judge reduced his bail from $100,000 to just $5,000. The case appears to be ongoing, and Miller is no longer affiliated with the church. 2. Marcus Schrenker. In January 2009, authorities in and around Birmingham, Alabama received a distress call from Indiana-based financier Marcus Schrenker, who claimed the windshield of his small plane had shattered while en route to Destin, Florida. Schrenker said he was bleeding profusely from an injury, prompting a frenzied manhunt in search of the injured pilot. Military jet crews discovered the plane abandoned while still in flight and followed it until it crashed. Investigators quickly noticed that the windshield wasn't shattered and there was no blood in the cockpit, leading them to believe that Schrenker had attempted to fake his own death by parachuting out of the plane and hoping the subsequent crash was bad enough for authorities to assume he'd perished. As it turned out, they were right. Schrenker had turned up at an Alabama residence home in the dead of night, soaked and claiming he'd been in a canoeing accident. The homeowner gave him a ride into town where he checked into a hotel under a fake name and paid with cash. By the time police got wind of Schrenker's attempt to fake his own death, he'd fled the area on a motorcycle he'd placed in a storage unit prior to his flight. 2 days later, Schrenker was captured at a campground in Quincy, Florida. He tried faking his death in an attempt to escape allegations that he'd stolen millions of dollars from his clients by making false promises of large returns and holding their money hostage, charging large percentages to anyone who wanted their funds back. After his capture, Schrenker pleaded guilty to federal charges and was sentenced to 51 months in prison, followed by a 10-year consecutive sentence in state prison, along with fines totaling more than $1.5 million. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Savon Donovan Johnson. In late March of 2024, a suspected migrant smuggler led law enforcement in Kinney County, Texas on a 15-mile chase, reaching speeds in excess of 100 miles per hour. After stopping to let a suspected undocumented migrant out of the car and resuming the pursuit, the driver was eventually disabled using spike strips. Up until that point, nothing about the situation seemed any different than the typical high-speed pursuits the police in border towns are known for engaging in with suspected smugglers from time to time. But the authorities were surprised to learn that the driver, 26-year-old Savon Johnson, is a member of the Texas Army National Guard. According to reports, the chase began after Johnson suddenly turned his vehicle around at a checkpoint. Ironically, he was deployed in the area as part of a border security program called Operation Lone Star, and he was allegedly using his work vehicle to carry out his smuggling activities. Johnson was arrested on suspicion of multiple state-level crimes and could reportedly face a mandatory minimum prison sentence of 10 years if convicted as charged. And while a decade in prison may sound like a long time, it's not enough in the eyes of Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who released a statement saying that if the allegations against Johnson are true, then he's a traitor and a criminal, whose actions directly contradict Operation Lone Star's objective. According to the most recent available updates on the case, Johnson is being held at the Val Verde County Jail.
10. Kissing a cottonmouth. A man in Florida made a grave error back in 2015 when he tried to make out with a cottonmouth snake. His name is Austin Hatfield from Wamama, and he was sent to the hospital after a kiss with a cottonmouth went terribly wrong and caused his mouth to swell up and his face to balloon as if he had just had an allergic reaction. According to his friends, Hatfield had captured the snake at his girlfriend's place a few days before and had been keeping it trapped inside of a pillowcase. He would take the snake out of the pillowcase, give it a kiss on the top of its head to show off to his buddies, then put it back in the pillowcase. But on this fateful Saturday afternoon, the snake struck back. Austin's friend Jason, who witnessed the attack, said the snake attached itself directly to his face. Austin literally had to rip the serpent out of his skin, then throw it on the ground. Before even a full minute passed, he was already swelling up dangerously. Austin was quickly taken to the Tampa General Hospital, where doctors found him in critical condition. Luckily, hospitals in Florida are used to taking care of snakebite victims. So with enough anti-venom, Austin went on to make a full recovery. Though of course, it was a horribly painful recovery and an experience he'll likely never forget. 9. Lacing the food. A woman in Florida got married in February of 2022, but she didn't want to have a boring wedding, and so she teamed up with a caterer to spike the food. They laced all the food being served at the wedding with marijuana. This included baked goods laced with marijuana, lasagna stuffed full of weed, and all the other edibles that were laid out for the guests. The biggest issue here was that the guests didn't know the food was laced. Before the happy day was over, roughly 20 people found themselves unwantedly affected by drugs and phoning 911. People thought they were having heart attacks. Some puked all over the floor, and people were screaming for their relatives to take them to the hospital. It was absolute pandemonium, and when the police showed up, bride Danya Glenny denied that she had anything to do with the mass poisoning at her wedding. When the cops tried to question the catering crew, they found they had already ditched the venue. Still, there were some extremely angry attendees, and the cops were forced to make a big investigation out of it. They took samples from the lasagna, from the alcoholic pudding shots, and even from the brownies. They found everything to have been laced and made the connection between the bride and the catering company, Jocelyn's Southern Kitchen. The bride was then arrested, as was the boss of the caterers, and each was charged with tampering, delivery of marijuana, and negligence. As for the motive, we still have no idea why the bride purposely ruined her own wedding by getting all her guests high. 8. Failed prison escape. In August of 2019, a man was discovered dead in his prison cell after a botched escape attempt. His name was Claudino da Silva, and he was busted trying to slip out of a prison complex in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, disguised as a woman. This man was in prison for drug trafficking and had been sentenced to 73 years and 10 months. In other words, his entire life. And so he devised an escape plan involving his 19-year-old daughter. When it was visiting time at the jail, he had his daughter come in to see him. When visiting hours were over, he then tried to walk out of the prison disguised as his daughter, dressed in girl's clothes with a wig on, some glasses, and a really poorly done silicone mask. It would have worked, too, except for the fact that he was so nervous, because according to authorities at the prison, they had just about let him walk free in his ridiculous disguise. The issue was that the inmate was acting a little jittery, which prompted the authorities to take a closer look. That was when they realized it wasn't a young girl at all, but a 40-something-year-old man in a wig. Even more interesting is the fact that Da Silva had a history of failed escape attempts. He tried to break out of a different prison in 2013 through the sewer system, but was quickly caught and thrown back into jail. 7. Dealing across the street. In 2013, a woman in Tuscaloosa was charged with selling marijuana. What made the case so bizarre was the fact that she was selling the drugs literally across the street from the Tuscaloosa Police Department. The house of the drug dealer was located on Mill Creek Lane, literally a stone throw away from the entrance to the department. The cops could see the traffic going in and out of the house to purchase drugs from where they stood in their offices, looking out through the windows. Her name is Bridget Ann Barnett, and she didn't get away with her drug dealing operation for very long. The West Alabama Narcotics Task Force searched her house on a Tuesday evening, found drugs and paraphernalia, and she was transported the short distance to the Tuscaloosa County Jail. The 24-year-old woman was charged on 2 counts of unlawful distribution of marijuana and held on a bond of $81,000. Police Sergeant Brent Blankley said that even though search warrants for drug dealers are a pretty common occurrence, the location of the residence came as a major surprise. 6. Tender scam. In 2021, the FTC reported that somewhere around $550 million was scammed through fake online romances. And that is only based on the victims who came forward to complain and report what happened to them. Most people are too embarrassed to go to the police, saying that they got ripped off by a stranger on the internet. Sunita Brittain is not one of those embarrassed people. She recently told the story of how she connected with a man named Michael through Facebook dating in January of 2022. When they started talking, Sunita just couldn't believe how much the pair had in common. She's a mother of 2 from Harvard and was just trying to meet a nice and honest person. But the lies started right away with Michael. He claimed to have the same birthday as her, and he even claimed to be the owner of a multi-million-dollar global engineering company and an expert on cryptocurrency. He really seemed like a great catch, but there were some red flags that Sunita blatantly ignored. For example, Michael refused to ever do a video call with her, so she never actually confirmed his identity. And then 8 days after they matched, Michael said there had been an accident at one of his engineering projects in Europe. Someone had gotten hurt, and he needed to deliver a payout of $210,000 to the family. 3 days later, he texted Sunita and said that the police in Cyprus were holding him in custody. This is what the experts call a long and complicated con. something so elaborate that the victim doesn't feel like they're being victimized. Michael asked Sunita if she could make 3 bank transfers to his lawyer from his offshore bank account. So he gave her a fake login to a fake bank account, which showed that he had over $9.2 million sitting there. But when she made the transfers, nothing happened. She could see the money in his account leaving, but Michael claimed the money wasn't going through. Things got really complicated, and Michael convinced Sunita to send his lawyer $11,800 of her own money, along with her identification, because he claimed that his bank had locked him out since someone signed in from an unrecognized device. In the end, Michael made $11,800, and Sunita realized the hard way that she had been scammed out of her entire life's savings. 5. Ammunition disaster in Michigan. In 2022, a man had both his arms blown clean off by an explosion in the town of Warren, Michigan. It happened on June 11th at about 3:10 in the afternoon, with the victim left in critical condition and missing half his limbs. The explosion ripped apart the garage of the house, with a following fire engulfing the entire home. According to the state police, the man was working on some kind of explosive device when it blew up in his face. It was lucky nobody else was hurt considering the power of the explosion, and lucky the man didn't die instantly. Not even any of the other houses in the neighborhood suffered damage, although the victim's home went up like a gas leak explosion. It was not his first rodeo either. The man had already been under investigation before he blew up his home. He has a long criminal history revolving around the manufacturing of explosive items and the dealing of illegal weapons. When the police looked through his house after the blast, they discovered traces of explosive devices, over a dozen guns, 4,000 rounds of ammunition, and the ruins of a weapons lab. Last we heard, the victim was still stuck in a coma at the hospital. 4. Life on the edge. In Australia in 2020, a mother lost her life in front of her family when she tried to take a photo and fell off the edge of a cliff. Her name was Rosie Lumba, and she ignored the safety barriers warning tourists not to go near the edge. She climbed over them, got dangerously close to the edge of Baroka Lookout, while her family tried to call her back over the barriers to safety, and then she slipped. Rosie, at 38 years old, fell 262 feet to her death. According to the police in Australia, Rosie had every opportunity to enjoy Grampians National Park safely during her visit. There were signs everywhere saying not to step over the barrier and not to go near the cliff, and yet she did it anyway, with her entire family there watching. Onlookers then heard her screams as she fell and shrieked the whole way down until she hit the ground. The tourist site was immediately closed off to visitors until the police could retrieve her body. Following the disaster, the authorities made a public statement warning people to stay clear of danger and heed the warning signs. 3. The horse head. A man in Calgary, Canada, was accused of leaving a horse's head in the mayor's driveway, as if he'd copied the idea straight out of The Godfather. This guy actually decided he was going to get himself a horse's head, slap an anti-vaccine sticker on it, and then leave it in the driveway of Mayor Jyoti Gandek's house. Of course, this wasn't a real horse head. It was made of latex, and so it could easily be thrown in the garbage. Still, the 43-year-old man responsible got into a whole lot more trouble than he had probably anticipated. He was charged with criminal harassment for walking up to the house at 3:30 in the morning on April 19, 2022, with a horse head tucked under his arm. He then laid it down on the driveway before getting into his vehicle and doing burnouts up and down the mayor's street. He thought he was sending a message to the mayor, but ended up being the one in handcuffs. 2. Trip to Death Valley. In June of 2022, David Kelleher took a journey to the Death Valley National Park. This is one of the hottest places on the entire planet, which is especially true in the summer. But this summer was by far one of the worst, since there was a heat wave that caused temperatures in the area to spike up to around 122 degrees Fahrenheit. And yet, in the middle of a deadly heat wave and a scorching desert, David Kelleher decided to be a tourist. He came out from Huntington Beach, arrived in Death Valley on the morning of June 8th, and parked his vehicle at Zabriskie Point. That was when it was discovered by a park ranger. 3 days later, the same ranger noticed the exact same vehicle again and realized something awful had probably happened. An investigation was started, and the rangers learned that David had been given a citation on May 30th for driving off-road. In other words, he got in trouble for cruising around in the desert. And when he spoke to the park official that day, he mentioned that he didn't have much gas left. Apparently, he didn't bother to bring any extra with him, and he never went to get any more. His body was found 6 days later about a mile from his vehicle, lying beside California Highway 190, obscured by a mesquite tree. It seems that David burned all his gas driving through the desert, struck out on foot in the blazing heat to try and get more, and then died on the side of the road because he had no water. 1. Colon cleanser. Denise Hernandez pleaded guilty in March of 2022 to 2 counts of assault causing bodily injury. Her guilty plea came after she was arrested for serving her employees colon cleanser, which she had disguised as energy drinks. She was arrested in June of 2021 for spiking her employees' drinks with absolutely no knowledge of their medical conditions. Denise Hernandez, who had been a Texas elections administrator in Smith County, presented 2 of her employees with cups filled with a mysterious pink substance. She told them that it was an energy drink called Spark, but after they drank it, she began to sing, "You just drank colon cleanser," while mocking her employees, who fell down in almost immediate pain. The employees came forward with what Hernandez had done, calling her a bully. She ended up losing her job, having to go through court, and getting publicly shamed, all because of a bad prank and an unwanted cleanse.
Thanks for watching. Would you rather get busted for stealing a car and leading police on a wild chase, or get busted trying to rob a bank? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.